My father-in-law brought a 16-year-old boy home on a Thursday evening in late October and told us the boy was staying for a while. For the next 5 days, the boy barely left the spare bedroom at the end of the upstairs hall. Every night, I lay awake in the dark, listening to sounds I couldn't quite place. Something between crying and whimpering, low and controlled, like someone trying hard not to be heard. When my husband finally put his shoulder into that door and broke it open, what we found on the other side changed everything I thought I knew about the family I'd married into. There are houses that feel larger on the inside than they look from the street. Dennis's place in Langley was like that. A 2-story craftsman with a deep covered porch and Douglas firs in the backyard, bought in the early 90s when Langley was still mostly farmland and the prices were half what they are now. He'd lived there alone for 3 years, since Aaron's mom, Carol, passed from a cardiac event that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon in February. We kept offering to have him move in with us, but Dennis was the kind of man who thanked you politely and then did exactly what he'd already decided. He called Aaron on a Sunday to say he had something to tell us, and that we should come for dinner. That was the first unusual thing. Dennis didn't call for dinner. He showed up unannounced with a box of Timbits and expected you to have coffee ready. Aaron and I drove out that evening with his sister Monica and her husband Lawrence following in their Audi. Monica had called me twice during the drive, her voice doing that particular thing it did when she was trying to sound casual. Did Aaron say what this is about? Because Dad sounded weird on the phone. Like, not his usual weird, different weird. I told her I genuinely didn't know. She made a sound like she didn't believe me. When we got there, Dennis was already seated at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug, looking at the wood grain. He was 68 years old and had spent most of his adult life running a small residential contracting business. He had the hands for it, wide, scarred, permanently stained with something that never quite washed out. He was not a man who fidgeted, so the fact that his thumb was moving in slow circles along the rim of his mug told me something before he said a single word. He waited until we'd all sat down and then said, without preamble, "There's a boy coming to stay here for a bit. His name is Lucas. He's 16. I'd appreciate it if nobody made a big deal out of it." Monica's fork hit the edge of her plate. Aaron set down his glass of water very carefully, the way he did when he was buying himself time. "A boy," Aaron said. "What boy? Whose kid?" "His name is Lucas," Dennis said again. "He needed somewhere safe to be. I'm going to make sure he has that." Monica laughed. "It wasn't a warm sound, Dad. We're going to need a little more than that." Dennis looked at her. "No, you're not." That was the whole dinner. Lucas arrived 2 days later, on a Tuesday evening, in the passenger seat of Dennis's truck. I happened to be over dropping off some groceries. Dennis had asked me for a few things and I'd offered to bring them by. So I was standing in the driveway when they pulled in. Lucas got out slowly, like someone who'd learned to move carefully so as not to draw attention. He was tall for 16 but thin, the kind of thin that a nurse recognizes because it tells you something. His jacket was too big. He was carrying a gray canvas knapsack with one strap held together by electrical tape. He kept his eyes on the ground. Dennis put a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. Not affectionately, exactly, but steadily, the way you'd steady something that might fall, and guided him toward the front door. Lucas glanced up at me once and then looked away immediately, his jaw tight. "This is Janet," Dennis told him. "She's married to Aaron. She's all right." That was the most glowing endorsement Dennis had ever given anyone, and it sat in my chest a little strangely. I helped bring the groceries in. Lucas went straight to the spare room at the end of the upstairs hall. Dennis showed him where the bathroom was, asked if he was hungry, and came back down alone 5 minutes later. "He needs rest," Dennis said. "I'd like meals brought up. He won't want to be at the table for a while." "Dennis," I said, "is he okay? I'm a nurse. If he's unwell." "He's tired," Dennis said. "I'll let you know if I need your help." He handed me back one of the grocery bags I'd brought, and I noticed that on the counter behind him, there was a printed order confirmation. I wasn't trying to read it, but I'm a nurse. I notice things by habit. Prescription-strength nausea medication, electrolyte packets, a blood pressure cuff, a pulse oximeter, compression bandages. I said nothing. I drove home and told Aaron what I'd seen. "He's a teenager," Aaron said. "Maybe he's just sick." "Sick with what?" I asked. Dennis bought a pulse oximeter. Aaron was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, Jen." "Neither did I. But I knew what a pulse oximeter was used for, and it wasn't for the flu. The next morning, Dennis called Aaron to say he'd had a new lock installed on the spare room door, a keypad model, and that he was changing the code so that it would be known only to him. He said he was also asking that nobody drop by the house without calling first. Aaron relayed this to me, and I stood in our kitchen for a long moment, not saying anything. "He's hiding something," I said. "He's a private person," Aaron said. "Aaron, a new lock, on a room with a teenager in it that he won't tell us anything about." Aaron pinched the bridge of his nose. I know, Jen. Just let me talk to him. Don't say anything to Monica yet." That was Wednesday. By Friday, Monica had already called me 4 times, each call a little more urgent than the last. She wasn't worried about Lucas. She was worried about their father's estate. If this kid is some teenager Dad's taken in off the street, that is a mental health crisis, and we need to get him proper support. But also, Dad has the house, he has his RRSPs, he has the company assets from when he sold the business. If he's getting attached to some kid nobody knows anything about. "Monica," I said, "you're worried about the money." A pause. "I'm worried about our father making decisions he'll regret." I'd been doing bookkeeping for a small veterinary clinic for 12 years. I wasn't any kind of executive, but I knew how to read numbers, and I knew when someone was telling me a story about feelings, when the actual story was about dollars. Monica wasn't wrong that there was money at stake. She was wrong about what she was actually worried about. Lawrence was worse. Aaron's brother-in-law was the kind of man who could make the phrase, "I just want what's best for everyone," sound like the opening clause of a contract. He'd been in commercial real estate for a decade, buying and flipping small strip malls in the Fraser Valley, and a couple of years ago he'd branched into a development project in Abbotsford that, as far as I could tell from watching his face at family dinners, had not gone the way he'd hoped. He smiled too much. He asked about Dennis's property value too casually. He had started mentioning the phrase estate planning in conversation approximately every 45 minutes. 2 nights after the lock was changed, I woke up at 2 in the morning because Aaron wasn't beside me. I found him standing at the top of our stairs in the dark, head tilted. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "Go back to sleep." But he didn't move, and in the silence I heard it too. From down the hall came the faint sound of something that could have been the wind, could have been the furnace, and then quiet and careful, and absolutely unmistakable. Crying. Not a child's crying. The crying of someone who had been holding something together for a very long time, and had finally run out of strength to keep doing it. Aaron's hand found the banister. "That's been going on for 3 nights," he said quietly. "You knew." He didn't answer, his jaw was working. In the morning, I called Dennis directly. I asked him if Lucas was receiving any medical care. He said yes. I asked who the physician was. He said he had it handled. I asked if Lucas had a health card. In BC, minors need coverage, and a teenager showing up without documentation would create problems. Dennis said he was working on it. "Working on it," I repeated. "Janet." His voice dropped. "I need a little more time, just a little more. I'm not doing anything wrong." I wanted to believe him. I'd always liked Dennis. He was blunt and sometimes difficult, but he was honest in the way that men of his generation were honest. Straightforwardly, without decoration. He didn't lie to people's faces. He just didn't always tell them things. The difference matters, but not as much as you'd think. Monica and Lawrence came over to our place that Saturday. Lawrence had a folder with him. He set it on our kitchen island with the particular care of someone who had prepared it in advance and wanted you to notice, but didn't want you to know he wanted you to notice. "It's just a draft," he said. "Nothing formal. But I've been talking to a colleague who specializes in estate matters, and he raised some good points." The folder contained what Lawrence described as a precautionary power of attorney arrangement. Something that would allow Monica, as next of kin, to make certain decisions on Dennis's behalf in the event that his judgment became compromised. The language was careful, but when I read further, I found a clause that authorized Monica's representative, the attorney or their designate, to make decisions regarding the family home and RRSP disbursements. Monica's representative. Lawrence's name wasn't written anywhere in the document, but the phrase "their designate" was doing a lot of heavy lifting. "Monica," I said, "who drafted this?" "Lawrence's contact," she said. "Does Dad know about it?" Lawrence jumped in. "We wanted to discuss it with the family first. in case there are questions. There are questions, I said. I closed the folder. Starting with, why does your name not appear anywhere in this document, but the phrase "their designate" appears 3 times? Lawrence smiled at me. I'm just trying to protect my wife. Aaron was looking at me across the island. I gave a very small shake of my head. He understood. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay listening to the rain on the roof, that particular relentless rain that arrives in the lower mainland in October and doesn't really leave until May, and I kept thinking about Lucas. Not about the estate. About a 16-year-old boy in a room with a keypad lock, crying alone at 2 in the morning, with a man in his late 60s, checking his blood pressure and leaving meals outside his door. I thought about the knapsack with the repaired strap, the jacket that didn't fit, the way he'd looked at me in the driveway and then looked away. I'd seen that look before. In years of nursing, I'd seen it on patients who had learned that making themselves small was a survival strategy. 3 days later, the emergency happened. I was at home when Aaron's phone went off at 11:30 at night. It was the automated alert from Dennis's carbon monoxide detector. Dennis had linked a few of his smart home devices to Aaron's phone after Carol passed, so someone would always get the notification. It turned out to be a false alarm. The sensor was old and needed replacing, but Aaron called Dennis immediately, and while they were on the phone, we heard it. Through the call, thin and muffled but unmistakable, a sharp crash, like something falling from a nightstand, and then Lucas's voice, ragged and high, I can't breathe right. And Dennis's voice, low and fast, cutting him off. I've got you, look at me, don't scratch, I've got you. Aaron stood up from the couch so fast he knocked over his mug. I'm going over, he said. I was already putting on my shoes. When we got there, Dennis met us at the door. He looked terrible, gray-faced, 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. He said Lucas had had an episode but was settled. He said we didn't need to go upstairs. Aaron walked past him. He went to the spare room and knocked hard. No answer. He knocked again. Dennis came up behind him. Aaron, he's sleeping. Open the door. Aaron. Open the door, Dad. Right now. Dennis looked at me. I looked back at him. I wasn't going to be the person who stopped this. Aaron didn't wait. He tried the keypad. Dennis hadn't given him the code, but he tried Carol's birthday, their old house number, the year his parents got married. On the 4th try, the lock clicked. He pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the lamp on the nightstand. Lucas was lying in the bed, pale and exhausted, his breathing shallow but steady. His wrists were wrapped in gauze. On the nightstand, a pulse oximeter, a water glass, a small container of pills, a neatly folded medical chart. Lucas looked at Aaron, and his face went completely still, the way a person's face goes when they are bracing for something they have been expecting for a long time. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, please don't make me leave. Aaron stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he walked to the chair in the corner and sat down. He looked at Dennis. Start talking, he said, all of it. Dennis sat on the edge of the bed, next to Lucas. He didn't look at his son right away. He looked at his hands. About 17 years ago, he said, after your mother and I went through a very cold stretch, and I want to be clear, it was my fault, not hers, never hers. I was away on a job in Kelowna for most of a summer. I made a mistake. Her name was Sandra. He stopped. I didn't know she was pregnant when the job ended. I came home. I didn't hear from her again. I told myself that meant everything was fine. Aaron's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands close on the arms of the chair. 2 months ago, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a social worker in Kelowna. Sandra had passed. Cancer. She'd been sick for nearly a year. She left behind a son, Lucas. He glanced sideways at the boy on the bed. Lucas was staring at the ceiling. She'd kept a letter with my name on it. Instructions to contact me if something happened to her. He exhaled slowly. I demanded a DNA test. The results came back 3 weeks ago. He reached under the nightstand and produced a folded piece of paper. He held it out to Aaron without looking up. Aaron took it. I leaned in and read the number at the bottom. 99.97% probability of paternity. Why didn't you tell us? Aaron said. His voice was very quiet. Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't know how to explain what I'd done to your mother's memory. Because Lucas was already sick. The same condition Sandra had. They think it's hereditary. It affects the nervous system, and I was trying to get him stable before. He stopped. Because I was a coward. I thought if I had more time, I could figure out how to say it properly. Lucas made a sound. Not words. Just a small involuntary sound like something releasing pressure. Aaron looked at him for a long moment. Lucas was still staring at the ceiling, his jaw tight, his gauze-wrapped hands folded on top of the blanket. He looked like someone waiting to find out whether the verdict was guilty. "Lucas," Aaron said. The boy turned his head. "Are you getting proper medical care? Real care, not just dad playing doctor." Lucas nodded. He found a neurologist, Dr. Mehta, at Langley Memorial. "I have an appointment Thursday." "Good." Aaron stood up. He looked at Dennis. "We're going to talk. But not tonight. Tonight you make sure he's okay, and tomorrow you sit down with all of us and explain exactly what happens next. Legally, medically, all of it." He walked out. I followed. At the door, I turned back for a moment. Lucas was watching me. He had the gray, exhausted look of someone who'd been carrying something very heavy for a long time, and had just been told, for the first time, that maybe he was allowed to set it down. "The gauze," I said quietly. "Is that from scratching? During the episodes?" He nodded. "Okay. I'm a nurse. When you're ready, I can show you some things that help. It doesn't have to hurt as much as it does." He looked at me for a moment, then he said, "Okay," very quietly. Like he wasn't sure he was allowed to say yes to things yet. The morning after the door was opened, Monica and Lawrence arrived at Dennis's house before 9. Monica had been crying. Lawrence had his leather folio under his arm, and the particular expression he wore when he believed a situation had created an opening for him. Dennis had already called his lawyer, a woman named Isabel Chartrand, who had done Carol's will and knew the family, and she was sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee when they walked in. Monica went to her father. Her emotions in that moment were genuine, confusion and hurt and grief all tangled together. "You should have told us," she said. "You should have trusted us." "I know," Dennis said. "I was wrong." Lawrence settled himself on the sofa and opened the folio. "Well, now that things are out in the open, I think we need to act quickly. The priority is protecting the estate. If word gets out that Dennis has an unacknowledged minor..." "Lucas is being formally recognized," Isabel said pleasantly. She had that particular quality of some lawyers, a calm that functions like a wall. "Dennis filed the declaration with the court last week. The DNA results support it. Lucas will be recognized as Dennis's biological child under BC family law." Lawrence blinked. "That affects the estate distribution." "Yes," Isabel said. "It does. Dennis has updated his instructions accordingly. Carol's share of the former business, which was left to Aaron and Monica, remains fully intact. Dennis's personal assets have been restructured to include a trust for Lucas's medical care and education." Monica looked at her father. "A trust," she repeated. "He's sick," Dennis said simply. "He needs care. That's all it is." Lawrence leaned forward. "I think what we should discuss is whether this recognition process was done with full due diligence." "Lawrence," Aaron had been standing in the doorway. He walked in now. "Stop." Lawrence looked at him. "I'm looking out for Monica." "No," Aaron said, "you're not." He picked up the power of attorney document from Lawrence's folio and held it up. "I had this looked at. The designate clause gives whoever Monica names." He looked at Lawrence, authority over decisions involving the family home and RRSP disbursements. "That's not protecting Monica. That's a backdoor." Monica turned to her husband. Lawrence's face arranged itself into an expression of wounded reasonableness. "Aaron, I drafted that in complete good faith. Your development project in Abbotsford is underwater," Aaron said. $93,000 in deferred loan payments coming due in 4 weeks. I know because you used the family holding account as collateral when you applied, and I have signing authority on that account." The room went very quiet. Monica stood up slowly from beside her father. She looked at Lawrence. Whatever was on her face, Lawrence seemed to find it harder to meet than Aaron's had been. "Is that true?" she said. "Monica, is it true?" Lawrence was quiet for 1 second too long. Monica walked to the folio, took the power of attorney document out of Aaron's hand and placed it on the coffee table. She smoothed it flat with one hand, the way you'd smooth a crumpled piece of paper when you want to get a clear look at what it actually says. Then she picked up her coat from the chair, where she'd left it. "I'll need a few days," she said to Dennis. "I'm not angry at you. I need to process this, but I'll be back." She walked out. After a moment, Lawrence followed, carrying the folio. The sound of the front door closing was very ordinary for something that felt so final. Dennis stared at the table. He looked smaller somehow than he had at the start of all of this. "I'm sorry," he said. "I made everything worse by trying to handle it quietly." Aaron sat down across from his father. "Yeah," he said, "you did. I didn't know how to tell you what I'd done. Not with your mother, not with everything she was to this last ambient. I thought if I could just get Lucas well, get the legal piece sorted, I could find a way to say it that didn't drag her memory into the mess I made." "But you made the mess anyway," Aaron said. "Just slower." Dennis nodded. "Yes. And Lucas sat in that room for 2 weeks being sick and scared because you were too proud to ask for help." "Yes." Aaron was quiet for a long time. Outside, a crow landed on the porch railing and then flew off. The rain had stopped briefly, and the light was that particular flat white of November in the lower mainland, where the sky and the ground seemed to be made of the same gray. "I can't tell you I'm fine with this," Aaron said finally. "I'm not. Not with what you did to Mom, not with keeping this from us, not with any of it." He looked toward the stairs. "But I can see that kid up there is not doing well, and he didn't do anything wrong, and he needs people who know what they're doing." He looked back at Dennis. "So we start there." 3 weeks later, Lucas attended his first Thursday night dinner at our house. He sat at the kitchen island while I made pasta and answered his questions about what I saw in the emergency room, because it turned out he was thinking about medicine. Not despite being sick, but because of it, because he wanted to understand what was happening inside his own body, and that impulse had grown sideways into genuine curiosity about everything. He ate 2 helpings. He asked if he could help with the dishes. Monica came to that dinner too. She and Lucas didn't talk much, but she passed him the bread without being asked, and he said thank you, and she nodded in the careful way of someone who is trying hard to be decent to a person who deserves it. Her marriage to Lawrence was in the process of becoming something else. She was staying with a friend in Coquitlam Lamb for the time being, and had engaged her own lawyer. She didn't talk about it much at dinner, but she seemed, somehow, less tightly wound than I'd seen her in years, like she'd been holding a door shut for a long time and had finally let it swing. Dennis came with Lucas. He sat at the end of the table and didn't say a lot, which was normal for him. But when Aaron refilled his coffee without being asked, Dennis said, "Thank you," in a way that meant considerably more than those 2 words. Some fractures don't heal clean. They knit wrong, leave a ridge you can feel when you run your hand along the surface. A reminder of where the break was. Aaron still gets quiet sometimes when certain things come up. Monica still flinches when she hears Lawrence's name. Dennis still looks at Carol's photograph above the mantel with an expression I don't have a word for. But Lucas is getting treatment. Real treatment, a proper protocol at BC Children's Hospital, with a neurologist who has seen this condition before and knows what to do. He's gained weight. He got a BC Services card. He's been looking at grade 11 course equivalencies so he doesn't fall a full year behind. He asked me once, quietly, on a night when it was just the 2 of us in our kitchen, and Aaron had stepped out to take a call, whether he thought his being here had ruined things for the family. I thought about the right answer for a moment. "Ruined things were already ruined," I said. "Secrets don't keep. They just get heavier until someone has to put them down. You weren't the thing that broke this family. You're actually the reason it stopped pretending to be fine." He thought about that for a while. "My mom always said the truth was the only thing that travels light," he said eventually. "I didn't know Sandra. I never would. But I thought she must have been, in at least one way, a better person than the circumstances of her life allowed her to be." The spare bedroom at the end of the upstairs hall has a poster on the wall now. A diagram of the human nervous system that Lucas printed off and taped up with blue painter's tape so it wouldn't leave marks. There's a library book on the nightstand, and a water glass, and the pulse oximeter Dennis bought is still on the windowsill, though it's used much less often now. The door is always open. That's not a metaphor. It's just the way things are. A door that was locked because someone was afraid of the truth is now open because the truth came out anyway, the way it always does. Not through the front, gracefully, with warning, but through whatever crack it could find at the worst possible hour, making more noise than anyone was ready for. I've learned not to be surprised by that anymore.